Have you decided whether you or yourself are going to stand in this election?
I thought very hard about this. How do I serve the cause of Brexit best? Because that's what I'm doing this for. Not for a career. I don't want to be in politics for the rest of my life. Do I fight a seat, try and get myself into Parliament, or do I serve the cause better, traversing the length and breadth of the United Kingdom, supporting 600 candidates? And I've decided the latter course is the right one.
So you're not going to stand yourself?
No, very difficult to do both. Very difficult to be in a constituency every day and at the same time be out across the United Kingdom. Because I do want people to know that when they're told this gets Brexit done, it'll all be over by Christmas, I think is what Boris Johnson is saying this morning. They need to understand that actually what's on offer is a close linkage with all the European institutions, a next negotiating phase of at least 3 years. So I'm going out across the country starting tomorrow.
Now, I just heard you say 600 candidates, so you have decided definitely to stand across Great Britain, not Northern Ireland, but Great Britain, around 600 candidates.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've wanted for months for there to be a Leave alliance. It seems obvious to me that no one party can own Brexit voters. There are Tory Brexit voters, there are Brexit Party Brexit voters, and a lot of Labour Brexit voters. And I always thought that to win an election, get a big majority so we can get a proper Brexit, a coming together would be the objective. I still hope and pray it happens, but it doesn't look like it will.
So there's no sign of any reaching out from the Boris Johnson team to you?
Not at this stage, no. Conversations have happened over the previous few weeks, but if Boris is determined to stick to this new EU treaty, then that is not Brexit, and that's the problem. I promise you one thing. If Boris was going for a genuine Brexit, we wouldn't need to fight against him in this election.
Well, I want to come on to what is a genuine Brexit and what isn't in a moment. But before we do, you know that an awful lot of people, including old allies of yours like Aaron Banks, the co-founder of the Brexit Party and so on, really fear that by standing in all of those seats, all of those Conservative seats, you will let Labour in and you will deliver a Jeremy Corbyn government.
I've heard all this before. I sat here talking to you in 2015 when you asked me the self-same question. Would the UKIP involvement, that was the party I led then, would it mean that Mr Miliband will become Prime Minister? And what happened on the results night? Hang on. What happened on results night? We saw the UKIP 4 million votes hurt the Labour Party more than it hurt the Conservative Party. And it may very well be the same this time round. So that argument
this is on a much bigger scale this time. The Brexit Party has been performing much more successfully in the polls than the UKIP Party did back then. And there's clearly lots and lots of Conservative seats which could be handed to Labour. Labour think you could give them an extra 40 seats.
And they thought that back in 2015, and it worked completely the other way around. David Cameron would not have got a majority without the UKIP vote. And again, it's this, we're looking at Brexiteers somehow through this centre-right Conservative prism, completely forgetting the 5 million people who voted Brexit and then voted for Jeremy Corbyn in 2017. And my argument would be, despite what we're hearing about Workington Man and all the rest of it, those people from those communities are more likely to vote Brexit Party than they are to vote Conservative.
And this is the case even for people like Steve Baker and Mark Francois, the ERG, so-called Spartans, who are pretty much as hardline on Brexit as you are. You're going to stand against them?
Here's the funny thing. You can talk about Steve Baker, talk about Aaron Banks. I mean, when Mrs May produced her new EU treaty, Banks and people like that said, we may as well stay members of the European Union. What Boris is giving you is 95% the same, and yet people are saying, I guess out of just sort of Brexit exhaustion, let's just do this. My fear is, if Boris Johnson gets this treaty through, we will never achieve independence. And that's why I'm saying all the Prime Minister has to do is change course, and I would back him 100%.
I want to drill down a bit into why you say it's not Brexit, because Boris Johnson says this gets us out of the customs union, the single market, it gives back control of the borders, and after the transition period we stop paying in money and we're no longer under control of the of the European Court. And all of those things, reading the treaty, reading the political declaration, seem to me to be true.
No, not true at all. You clearly haven't read it.
Well, I have read it.
Well, with respect, let's just drill down, if you want into some of this. Number one, the European Investment Bank. We will have an ongoing liability after Brexit, going on for how many decades, I don't know, of perhaps up to nearly £40 billion if things go wrong. Number two, any future free trade agreement, if we signed it, who would be the arbiter of disputes? Can I tell you? The European Court of Justice, who will make binding rulings. It says it in the document.
If we agree to that in the document, in the transition period, that's true. But after the transition period, and business would say...
The transition period only ends if we sign up to a new agreement. Now, Monsieur Barnier, who, by the way, is brilliant, I wish he'd been working for us, Monsieur Barnier says the next phase of talks will last at least 3 years. How is this getting Brexit done? And I'll tell you something. But when people say to me in the street, well, look, if Boris just gets Brexit done, isn't that okay? When you tell them the next phase will last at least 3 years, they are horrified.
But the transition period, if you're a business and you want some way of getting from where we are now to where the new world that will be outside the EU, the new world transition, you need a smooth path.
The new world will not be actually effectively outside EU rules, because what Barnier brilliantly has written in is that in any future free trade agreement, in everything from financial services to fisheries, we will be tied to the EU rule book, but of course, have no say over how those laws are made. Now, that is not Brexit. Brexit was apparently taking back control of our laws, our money, and our borders. And very clearly, this proposition does none of those things.
But if we choose to leave at the end of the transition period with no deal at all, never mind the deal that Boris Johnson tries, we can. It's clear in the document.
Well, that's fine.
We can go out.
We hear, yesterday we heard that Boris Johnson apparently, in the Conservative manifesto, is going to drop the commitment to leaving with no deal, clean break.
Well,
if that happens, then we find ourselves in a position where probably the result of Boris's treaty going through is we finish up rejoining. This doesn't get Brexit done. I think this kills off the chance of us getting genuine independence.
The great dilemma for an awful lot of voters is that they hear you and they say, OK, there's a point there, but they also hear Boris Johnson, who ran the Vote Leave campaign back in the day. He was one of the people, said it was down to him, who has sacked lots of Conservatives from his party to get his deal through and has fought very, very hard for this deal. And they think, if he says it's Brexit, I'm inclined to trust him.
Well, I suggest you ask him some questions yourself about this. I mean, for example, in the House of Commons, when he was asked what it meant for Northern Irish exporters selling goods into Great Britain, he didn't know that under what he'd signed, they'd need to sign customs declarations. When he was asked about fisheries by Owen Paterson in the House of Commons, he said, it's marvellous. We get back control. Well, read Article 72 and see what it says. The point is, I'm not even sure Mr. Johnson's on top of the detail of this. The more the British public look at this withdrawal treaty, the less they're going to like it.
The thing is, at some point, you have become a bit of a Brexit purist. If you'd been offered this deal 5 years ago, it's not a perfect deal. Everybody knows it's not a perfect deal. If you'd been offered a deal like this 5 years ago, you'd have been jumping with joy.
I'd have said sling your hook.
Really?
Pointless. It doesn't get us out of anything. It doesn't work at any level. It is a gigantic con. We should not sell out to this. It's a Remainers Brexit. It's virtually worse than staying where we are. And if we go through this route, we will finish up rejoining. I want this.
You really think that Boris Johnson is a Remainer?
I'm very happy to compromise in lots of ways. Very happy to do that.
Okay,
but not to.
Okay, well let's talk about compromise.
I did not spend 25 years campaigning to leave the EU treaty to sign up to another one, and that is what this does.
Well, let's talk about compromise, because what you're asking the Prime Minister to do is to rip up the treaty he has so painfully negotiated over the last few months, get rid of it, and go for what you would call a clean break, other people say a no-deal Brexit, which he knows will split his party down the middle.
To go for a trade relationship. Look, Donald Tusk offered Theresa May a free trade deal. She refused it during those negotiations. Going for a close and special partnership, I am suggesting that we go back to discussing simply trade, but not political linkage.
In the politics, we've been quite abstract about this. I want to show you one particular seat, Lincoln, which we've got here. It was a Tory seat. Labour took it last election. They've got nearly 48% of the vote. Tories have got nearly 45% of the vote. UKIP had the difference. It was only 250 votes. You stand well. You do half decently in Lincoln, and that will remain a Labour seat.
Do you know, I campaigned in Lincoln a few weeks ago.
But you'll turn it Labour. You'll keep it Labour.
I campaigned in Lincoln a few weeks ago in the city centre, talking to a lot of Labour voters in Lincoln who voted for the Brexit Party in the European elections and may well do so again in a general election. Just look in those European elections. Where did the Brexit Party do best? The North East and South Wales, Labour areas. There are millions of Labour voters who feel completely betrayed by a North London dominated Labour Party that no longer speaks to them.
short question, is there anything short of tearing up his deal that Boris Johnson could offer you to persuade you not to fight all of those seats?
If he tells me that we're not going to sign a new EU treaty or we're going to pursue a relationship based on trade and friendship, I would say great.
Finally, there's been a lot of talk about the TV debates in this, and at the moment the broadcasters tend to be focusing on the Johnson versus Corbyn choice. Who's going to be Prime Minister?
Yeah.
Do you think that's fair?
I don't think it's unreasonable for the two to have a head-to-head because clearly they lead the two biggest parties. What I do think is this. We finished up last time round with leaders' debates, in 2015 when I was involved, with 7 or 8 people on the panel. And I think there's a very strong argument, actually, for having a debate in Wales, a debate in Scotland, and a debate in England. I really do.
Nigel Farage, thanks very